Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Penn Dental Medicine. My name is Beverly Crawford. I'm the Director of Student Multicultural Affairs and Inclusion here at the Dental School. And welcome to the symposium, Balancing Voices, the Intersection of Free Speech and Racism in Academia. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Wolff, but before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the Committee for Cultural Growth. This is a committee at Penn Dental Medicine that's comprised of administrators, faculty, staff, and students, with a main focus of supporting our community through inclusion and belonging. Dean Wolff serves as our 12th Dean, Morton Enstam Dean of Penn Dental Medicine. He joined PDM from NYU in 2018. Dr. Wolff has completed numerous international research and oral health assessment programs and has been a lifelong advocate and dental provider for individuals with physical, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. Dean Wolff is a fellow of the Academy of General Dentistry. He has authored or co-authored 80 original articles as well as 20 books and chapters. He's served as the chair of the American Dental Education Association's Council of Sections, as president of the American Association of Oral Biologists. Dean Wolff holds both a DDS and a PhD from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, where he also served on the faculty for more than 2 decades before moving to NYU. Dean Wolff was renewed as the Penn Dental Medicine for a new term, so we offer him our congratulations and look forward to another many years of here at the dental school.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Margaret Yang. I am the Director of Student Affairs and Engagement. We're really excited to see all of you here. I'm here to introduce Dean Katharine Strunk. Dean Katharine Strunk is the Dean of Graduate School of Education and the George and Diane Weiss Professor of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. She's nationally renowned for her partner-driven research and leadership, which has brought multi-method collaborative scholarship to bear on pressing questions facing education and educators. She partners extensively with districts and state policymakers, including working with the Los Angeles Unified School District and the California and Michigan Departments of Education. She served as the only researcher on Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's Student Recovery Advisory Council, which informed COVID-19 recovery efforts in schools statewide. She has also advised on numerous major local and state education reforms. Prior to joining Penn GSE, Dean Strunk was the Clifford E. Erickson Distinguished Chair in Education and a Professor of Education Policy by Curtsey Economics at Michigan State University. From 2009 to 2017, she served on the faculty of the University of Southern California's Rodier School of Education and Sol Price School of Public Policy. She began her career at the University of California at Davis School of Education, serving on faculty from 2007 to 2009. We would like to welcome Dean Wolff and Dean Strunk to the stage.
So as Dean of Penn Dental Medicine, I'd like to welcome everybody here in person and all the participants who are online right now, who are participating with us. I'd like to thank our Committee on Cultural Growth for bringing this subject together and helping to bring all of the speakers together here at Penn Dental Medicine. I thank everybody who has come to join our panel and participate with us. As we go forward, it's just a giant step forward. These are incredibly difficult times for all of us, emotionally, intellectually, and physically to a large extent. We've seen a nation come through pandemic and racial tensions. We've seen tensions in our political environment. We've seen global tensions throughout the world, and it's just, if you read the papers and your blood pressure doesn't either sink or go up, it's very difficult to believe. These are just very emotionally difficult times. Figuring out how we communicate with each other is just an incredibly important piece of where we are. Katharine and I had a yin and yang series of responsibilities that took place after October 7th, when I was asked to chair the anti-Semitism task force, and Katharine and Vijay Kumar were asked to chair the Presidential Commission on Hate. Both of us had the very interesting experience of hearing the pain of a campus, seeing the pain of a campus and living through it. This discussion today is an outcome of our reality about what has transpired and where we need to move in the future. And I hope today that we'll have some spirited discussion about having discussion. Katharine, the microphone is yours.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Thank you for coming today. And I want to just say, first of all, we have a couple members of the Presidential Commission and the task force in the audience who are going to be on the panel today. So we get to hear a lot about that. For those of you who don't know, I started my deanship July of last year. So came to Penn at an opportune time. And then got to know the campus incredibly well very quickly because of the role that I was asked to play on the commission. It was actually a blessing because what it let me do was get to know some amazing people, but it also let me get to know the campus in a way that I don't think I would have otherwise, in particular getting to hear some of the issues that had plagued the campus for years and that I think were reflective of things that have been plaguing society for a long time. So as we think about how we move forward from last year and into the future, I'm really excited to hear what this panel has to say and what Anita has to say, because I think that we're going to learn a lot about the importance of free speech and academic freedom, but also how we balance that with being part of a community and hearing each other and being kind and respectful with each other, which is, I think, what the commission, which, by the way, was not just on countering hate, but was on building community,
Yes.
which was a key element of it, is about. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing about today's panel. And anything else you wanted to say, Mark, as we kick it off?
No, being civil and friends with each other is a real big part of where we hope things move. It is my honor to introduce a friend, somebody that I came to know literally in my first days as a Penn Dean in 2018. Anita Allen is the Henry R. Silverman Professor of Law and Professor of Philosophy, a graduate of Harvard Law and a PhD from the University of Michigan in philosophy. Dr. Allen is internationally renowned as an expert on philosophic and social justice dimensions of privacy and data protection law, ethics, bioethics, legal philosophy, women's reproductive rights, and faculty advancement. She was Penn's vice provost for faculty in 2013 through 2020 and chaired the Provost Arts Council. She has been an incredible counsel to me as I was an early dean moving forward in the areas of her expertise, which frankly, I approached her as the vice provost, not as the expert in the area. I've seen her present several times now in these areas. It's a real thrill to introduce you. Thank you so much, Anita, for joining us today. Please.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, those who are present in the room and those who are present online. As Dean Wolff was saying, these are uniquely difficult times for us, and it is both an honor and frankly a burden to come and stand in front of you and dare to talk about academic freedom and race. So I decided to name my remarks "Academic Freedom for All, Past, Present, and Future." And one of the great things about this invitation is that it gave me an incentive to look back at the history of academic freedom and to refresh my knowledge, but also to learn some new things. And so it may strike you that my talk is a little bit nerdy because I am going to start with some deep history before I move on to some of the more contemporary issues. So, of course, all the views that are expressed here are my own. They're not the views of the law school or the university or any unit or official of the university. And I want to point out that I came to have the views that I have by service and I've served on committees of the American Association of Law Schools, the American Philosophical Association, the American Association of University Professors, and the American Civil Liberties Union. And all of these organizations have in one way or another schooled me about the challenges of academic freedom. So overview. So I'm gonna touch on a number of different topics. Obviously in 20 minutes, I can't go into detail on anything, but I do hope I can touch on and put in a framework some of the things that I think you're probably curious about, such as the origins, legal foundations, role of institutions, race, recent Penn events, and the AAUP principles and future challenges. I want to start though by saying that I am a strong supporter of academic freedom. I consider myself a very strong supporter of academic freedom. There are those who do not consider me a strong supporter of academic freedom, and I am baffled and bewildered by those people and their blogs and commentaries, because as I hope, as you'll see, I just can't imagine what it would mean for anyone to be more responsibly a strong supporter of academic freedom. So before I get into the definition of academic freedom, though, I wanted to mention an experience that I had as a teenager, really, that explains why I might be such a strong supporter of academic freedom. So I am the 5th Black woman in history to earn a PhD in philosophy. And the 3rd such woman was Angela Davis. I think the people in the room who are on the older side may recall that Angela Davis was and is a globally known activist. She was in the 1960s associated with both the communist movement, American communist movement, with the Black Power movement, with feminism, and generally with radically left politics. Well, she went to Germany and got her PhD in philosophy. And when I went to graduate school in philosophy in 1974, she was the only Black woman I'd ever heard of who had a PhD in philosophy. And so I was, in a sense, although I was a much more moderate, mainstream kind of a person, I was very inspired by her example to not only to learn German, but also to study philosophy. Angela Davis had the distinction of being fired from California universities twice. The first time she was fired for her being a communist, she appealed the decision to the courts, and she actually won the right to be reinstated, because you cannot, under our First Amendment, a public university cannot fire a person for having an unpopular viewpoint. So she was reinstated after Governor Reagan fired her. And then she went back to teach in University of California, and she was fired again. This time, they didn't use her being a communist, but they claimed that her behavior was objectionable. She was instigating students student misconduct and so forth. And so she was fired again. And that time she bagged it for a while. And then she got involved in some criminal activities, which I will not go into right now. But the point I'm trying to make is that my intellectual and academic role model was a woman who, because she had unpopular beliefs, was fired from a major state university twice. And so I carry with me the notion that people like me have to be on alert that our ideas may be unpopular, and we may be subject to unfair dismissal. So the last thing in the world I would want to see happen is any professor to be fired just because they have unpopular views. That's not something that I would support at all. But I do think there are limits to free speech and to conduct that relates to free speech that I will say a little bit more as I proceed. So first of all, academic freedom. Academic freedom is often explained as the right grounded in policy and law to teach and to study and to research without the interference of one's institution or the government. And it's very important in higher education, because in order for us to do our jobs, which is to produce knowledge and to share knowledge, we need to be free to say what we believe and say what we think others believe, and to debate and discuss ideas. It turns out that academic freedom is a very, very, very old concept. Some people would trace it back to the medieval pre-modern era with universities like the University of Bologna and the University of Paris, where faculty organized guilds and they sought autonomy from religious as well as from secular authorities. The early concept of scholarly autonomy included the idea that professors should have the right to teach and research freely without external control. This sounds very, very modern. But it wasn't really until, I would say, the modern era, the Enlightenment, that these ideas came to be quite well defined. And in the 17th and 18th century, thinkers like John Locke and Voltaire and Kant emphasized ideas of having individual reason, which is a pathway to free inquiry and knowledge. So that the ideas of the Enlightenment of individual freedom included the idea of the individual's right to acquire information and to share information and to teach information, discover information, for the sake of improving not just the individual's own mind and heart and soul, but also to improve society. Free inquiry is the pathway to a better society. Individual liberty, a pathway to social liberty. So those ideas were very, very influential at the beginning. We sometimes hear references to the Humboldtian model from the 19th century. Humboldt was Wilhelm von Humboldt was a German who founded the University of Berlin in 1810. And he defended a couple of freedoms: the freedom to learn and the freedom to teach. Freedom to teach, Lehrfreiheit; freedom to learn, Lernfreiheit. And his ideas had a huge influence on modern universities, including our own, which defend the idea of research and teaching as a kind of autonomy. The American context. So in the colonial period, there was still a lot of religious control over those early institutions of higher education. And there was, though, also the competing influence of the Enlightenment and secularism, but there was still a strong, especially sort of Protestant denominational hold over some universities. Virginia stands out as one of the universities that was established with a fairly non-denominational flavor to it. And I'm going to learn how to turn this mouse the right direction in a minute. There we go. Okay, so many would count the founding of the AAUP and its Declaration of Principles in 1915 as critical to the history of academic freedom. And the principles from 1915 declared freedom in research, teaching, extramural speech, which is to say speech outside the university as well as speech inside the university, and the idea most important and dear to me, because I'm a tenured faculty member, tenure as a safeguard. How does tenure work? Well, tenure gives faculty members a very, very strong presumption against being fired, especially being fired mostly for or entirely for views that one might hold that are unpopular. There are a couple of Supreme Court cases that over the years that have helped to solidify notions of academic freedom. And these cases have, for example, limited the ability of the government to dictate what universities may and may not teach and whom they may and may not hire. There's also cases that emphasize the importance of faculty members being able to have freedom and autonomy and tenure against even when they have unpopular views. So there was a whole swathe of time, like the 1950s and late 1940s, when faculty members were being fired for being communists or not signing loyalty oaths. And these loyalty oath requirements have been struck down by the Supreme Court under the First Amendment, as have certain kinds of overreaching governmental interference with the affairs of universities. Look at my slide. I found this historic images of Penn Dental. And it has nothing to do with my slide, but it's like, I just love this image. Yeah, so as I was saying, the Supreme Court rulings emphasize institutional autonomy and a balance between universities' independence and state oversight. Yes, states can engage in oversight. For schools like the vet school or the dental school, there's some reason that maybe to have some governmental oversight, but we don't want that to turn into a literal dictation of what can and cannot be taught in a micro sense. And then, of course, faculty and tenure rights and job security for non-tenured faculty, and for students, freedom of expression in the classroom and campus activism protections as well. These came into big play here at Penn in the spring. So Penn. So Ben Franklin, early history of our university. Ben Franklin, whose vision for Penn was somewhat secular and non-denominational. There was a strong emphasis in the early days at Penn on practical knowledge as opposed to mere theoretical knowledge and inquiry. But I wouldn't say that Franklin had a clearly contemporary vision of academic freedom, but he was wary of too much denominational or religious authority in the lives of universities. McCarthyism was a huge problem, and the whole McCarthyism Red Scare did have an impact at Penn in the 1950s Cold War era. All across the country, faculty were subjected to political scrutiny, and there was a great deal of defense here at Penn and other universities, great universities, of the idea of academic freedom in the face of anti-communism. But there was I'm not going to say that there was never anybody at Penn or other great universities like Yale or Harvard or Hopkins that never faced scrutiny or even sanction, but I'm saying that it was not the norm for people to be fired because they were communist or fired because they were had unpopular views at Penn. In thinking about Penn and race, one has to remember the scandalous case of Samuel Morton and his racial pseudoscience. He was the man who devoted himself to research on skull measurements. He measured the skulls of Native Americans, indigenous people, African Americans, white people, toward the conclusion that the white races are superior to the brown and other races. But his legacy, he was affiliated with Penn. His legacy, though, in Philadelphia has been apologized for. Our university had this gigantic skull collection. They apologized for being the repository of this collection and for the shame it represents. But Penn has been a place over time where race relations have not always been easy. During the Civil Rights era, Black students and faculty at Penn fought hard for the creation of an African American Studies program. They called it Afro-American Studies program, and they got one. It kind of fell into a little bit. It didn't satisfy everybody's needs and goals for what a true African American or Africana Studies department could be. And believe it or not, some of the young people in the room, believe it or not, we didn't have an African American Studies department at Penn until 2012. So it was late coming to Penn. And imagine then how it might have been challenging to have good informed conversations about the sociology and the history and the philosophy and the politics and the business of American race relations without having a department that to sort of center and focus on those issues. So we've come a long way, and I'm glad to see that we have now a stronger tradition. And there was just a story I saw a couple of days ago from last year about Penn's long tradition as a center for the study of African American history. A little bit of an exaggeration, but not entirely false. New hires have come along who have helped to build and to rebuild and to strengthen what we've got. What we've got is we have wonderful colleagues. I have wonderful colleagues in Africana Studies, but it's been a small department, and now it's growing, and now other departments are also starting to hire more people of color. The law school has finally begun to hire more people of color, and so it's a good thing for the university, I think. Okay, so affirmative action has been a problem throughout American post-Civil War civil rights history, and we had a unfortunate decision recently that struck down many forms of affirmative action that we have valued. after having lived with Baki for a long time. We're now in a situation where we're not supposed to do most types of affirmative action. We're struggling with that, and when it remains to be seen whether the complexion of our campus will change dramatically in a bad sense, become less diverse, become less inclusive, become less place of belonging because of the affirmative action decision. We don't know yet. From what I'm seeing in the law school, however, I am very encouraged. We have a wonderful diverse class of our first-year law students this year, whom I taught torts just earlier today. But examples of recent debates over the limits of academic freedom at Penn have been ongoing. And you all probably read last week in the Penn Almanac and also in the Daily Pennsylvanian and also in the New York Times that Acting President Jameson decided to endorse the conclusion of Liz McGill, who endorsed the conclusion of a faculty panel that it was appropriate for the law school to impose major sanctions on Professor Amy Wax. And those sanctions included a suspension, a substantial pay cut, and a reprimand from the provost, as well as some other sanctions that are less severe. The reason for this action, which the right wing, and I'll use that expression. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but the right wing has sided with Amy Wax, but not just the right wing, not just the people like the white nationalists whom she's invited to speak in her class, but also libertarians who are desperately afraid that if we give an inch on academic freedom, the whole country is going to come tumbling down. In fact, I read a blog the day that the Penn Almanac article came out announcing the sanction that basically said, if I were a Penn professor, I would be quaking in my boots. I would be terrified, as if somehow this decision about this one professor means that all of us are somehow at risk of losing our ability to teach and to speak. Because I don't think that implication can or should be drawn at all. This was one individual whose behavior, not just her speech, but her behavior and her speech were deemed to be egregious by a committee of diverse members of our faculty, endorsed by our president, former president, and our acting president. And we can talk more about that if you'd like to. I don't have a lot more to say about it publicly, but I do think that it was a long time. This process took, I think, almost 10 years, and that it was a measured, deliberative process that does not have the implication that there's no such thing as academic freedom here at Penn. Talk about the balancing. How do you balance academic freedom with what you need for people to feel as if they belong? This is a woman who made disparaging comments about African Americans, South Asians, Asians, immigrants, even her own ethnic group of Jews. She's made disparaging comments about. So here's a person who, for no good reason, not only speaks disparagingly about people who are on the margins, many of them, but she also acts or behaves in ways which have made her students and her colleagues at Penn suffer. So the combination of her behavior and her speech. And I think this is one of the things we should look to, whether or not, in addition to what people say, how people treat other people in the faculty lounge, in the classroom, in the seminar room, is what we need to be focusing on. And if that behavior falls short of Penn's ideals, I think that it's appropriate to consider imposing sanctions. So I was at Oxford last spring for what they call their Trinity term. It's the third term of the year. I was the HLA Hart lecturer and a Hart visiting scholar located in University College, Oxford. It was great. So I left Penn and there was an encampment. And I went to Oxford and there was an encampment. This photograph, which I took myself, you can see this, that all around this beautiful library building, there was a pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel encampment. And it was interesting to see the different way in which Penn and Oxford approached their encampments. So initially, the students set up their encampment in front of one of the museums that was a little bit far from the part of town where the tourists were mostly congregating. So you could be a tourist in Oxford and not know there was an encampment, not know that there was a strong set of voices protesting the Israeli government. But I think the students figured, why are we on the margins? We need to go to the heart of things. This is the most visited tourist attraction, most popular tourist spot in the entire city of Oxford. And so they went there. But the university didn't remove them, at least not right away. And they were literally blocking, this is the entrance, they were literally blocking the entrance to the library, and yet the university didn't move them. There was a back door for a while that students could enter the library through, but then they decided to put the tents all the way around the building, and the university didn't remove them. And so to get to the library, you end up having to go through another building, through a tunnel, like, well, I got right through a tunnel, under the ground to get to the library. So, and I thought, interesting that the university values free speech more than it values the convenience of students who want to study in the library. And I'm not saying that I endorse that view. I think it's something to think about, but it was just striking to me how much less fraught and controversial and scary, I put it that way, the encampment at Oxford seemed than the one here at Penn. So when I heard that the president was going to call the police and have them take away the students and disband our encampment here at Penn, I was still at Oxford, but I watched it live stream. Got up early, I watched it live. I was so afraid that somebody was going to get hurt. I was afraid it was going to be, 4 dead in Ohio, or, some of the older folks know what I'm talking about. I was afraid of some horrible thing happening because there's going to be a confrontation between very upset, exhausted, and angry students and faculty and the local police. And so when I was watching the live stream, I was focused on, are the police being respectful of the protesters, and are the protesters being respectful of the police trying to do the job they've been called in to do without violence? So I don't know exactly how long the encampment at Oxford lasted, but I think that by the time I was getting ready to come back at the end of month 2, that they were starting to disperse. I think more because it was getting close to the end of the semester than because of the actions of the university. But my sense was that at Oxford there is more support for the pro-Palestinian movement than here at Penn's campus. I think here at Penn's campus there was I felt more of a balance between the people who sided with the Israeli government, people who sided with the Palestinian people and actors. But at Oxford, it was clear that there was a very, very strong empathy for the Palestinians and the people of Gaza who were suffering. It's everywhere. It's not just here at Penn, it's everywhere. There's no reason to think that we're going to get it necessarily better than other schools are going to get it. I think that we all have some different challenges. I think that the different demographic of Oxford means that they have different priorities, and we're going to have here. But I hope that, and I think I hope that we will be careful not to leap to punish and reprimand peaceful protests. I think there can be such a thing as a protest that's gone on too long or that's inappropriate, but I think we should be very, very careful not to demonize protesters as such, or to be too ready to say, oh, they're in my way, it's inconveniencing me, because I think there's a place in university education actually for acts of protest. Okay, so there's a tension between free speech and hate speech that I think has to be confronted. And as a Black woman, I think I'm particularly worried that sometimes we think that free speech means hate speech, that free speech means the right to say hateful things, when free speech means the right to express one's views, which don't have to be hateful. It's not so hard to avoid hate. But it seems as though, especially today, the platforms, the arenas we have for free speech turn into ugly spaces where people say and do needlessly ugly things. Say and do needlessly ugly things. And then there's this whole campus debate over academic freedom and political activism. It's very hard to kind of meet that balance. I was when I was vice provost for faculty, there was for a time a group of people who set up a protest on Locust Walk right in front of the Button. They were not affiliated with Penn in any way, and they were protesting feminism and abortion rights and gay rights. And my office was in College Hall, and I had to walk past the protesters to get to and from my car and my law school. I'll be extremely frank here and blunt, but one day I stood and I'm looking at this sign. It says "Women belong in the kitchen," and this kind of stuff. And this protester, started to hurl slurs at me, and he actually said to me, like he called me a vagina licker. This is Penn's campus. This is supposed to be an enlightened community where a faculty member whose sexuality they don't know, for one thing, but this language is hurled at me. And of course, I call Wendy White, you got to do something about these protesters. And she's like, Anita, as you know, Locust Walk is a public thoroughfare, and Penn cannot just summarily remove people from Locust Walk just because they're saying things you don't want to hear, you don't like. But it not only did it pain me as a woman to have and a supporter of LGBTQ rights, to have someone try to insult me by implying that I'm a lesbian, but it also troubled me that the students, their response to this protest, which went on for several days, was they set up a table and they started to sing Broadway tunes at the top of their lungs. They were going to drown out. It wasn't like, the marketplace of ideas, you meet ideas with ideas. It was like, we're gonna sing louder than you can cast aspersions on our students and faculty. And I thought, clever, but it doesn't strike me this is the best use of our students' time. Or is it? I mean, or is it? We can talk maybe during the Q&A about whether it's a good thing that our students are challenged to find ways to counter protest. Maybe that's as educational as sitting through, German 101 or Wharton 303 or whatever. But I felt like, I didn't, at the time I thought, I don't want my students to have to do this, as much as I love a good Broadway tune. Don't get me started. I can sing them all. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna wrap up soon, but I just want to remind you that the AAUP's concepts are very, very important because although Penn is a private university, we're not bound by the First Amendment. It's a common mistake. We're not bound by the First Amendment, except that we have voluntarily embraced First Amendment ideals such as academic freedom and free expression. We are a free expression campus. And so that means that some faculty members or students who are who feel they're being punished or disciplined for freedom of expression or free speech may say, well, you have a contractual obligation to me because although you're not a First Amendment public institution, you promised me if I work here, if I go here, that you're going to allow me to speak freely. So there's that issue. But the AAUP principles Penn is also endorsed, and these include the freedom to research, to teach, and freedoms of extramural speech. When I was vice provost for faculty, we had a number of situations in which Penn professors made comments off campus. Some made them through social media. And the question arose, can we do anything about that? Well, you wouldn't believe. In one case, a faculty member tweeted a comment that was, it was a little racially insensitive. I would agree with that. And we got, I'm going to say, 600 or 700 emails, phone calls, calling for her to be fired. And of course, she was not fired because Penn doesn't fire people for their tweets, at least not in my experience. But there is this sense on the outside world that somehow that we don't do enough to strike down ugly speech, that we are too tolerant of faculty and we let them get away with all kinds of stuff. I think that we should be, cautious. And again, for me, the story of Angela Davis is foremost in my mind. I don't like to think that people can be summarily dismissed for one tweet or for conduct that is merely a speech that's not maybe even intended to be targeting anybody in question, but maybe just happen to be offensive. So caution. All right. This, by the way, is a picture I took of a Oxford dining hall. There's a Harry Potter all over the place. what I should have to, I have to mention the idea of cancel culture before I sit down, and how we're having a moment when politics are very polarized, cancel culture is running rampant, and free speech is at risk. But it's troubling to me, this whole legislative effort in the states and in some universities to try to slap down critical race theory, to burn those books, or to keep those ideas out of the curriculum, even in universities and colleges, and the impact of trying to keep critical race, so-called critical race theory, out of public universities. And I this image here is Derek Bell, Patricia Williams, Kimberly Crenshaw, and Chuck Ogletree. And they are the faces of critical race theory. And I know and knew all these people. Derek Bell and I were very close friends. In fact, he wrote one of my recommendations to law school, in which he said, "I've never recommended a more qualified person." Yay. He gave me the letter, like, look what I wrote for you, And Patricia Williams was one of the law professors, Black women law professors, who was in the field when I first started out. And we used to have a Northeast Corridor Black Women's Law Collective, and we met regularly to discuss our scholarship. Kimberly Crenshaw was my classmate at Harvard. She's considered by many to be the sort of one of the founders of critical race theory. And Chuck Ogletree was a professor at Harvard, and I got to know him when I was a visiting professor at Harvard and otherwise. None of these people have horns. I mean, they're extremely kind, generous, thoughtful people who have no interest in bringing down the United States, but they have very strong critical perspectives and constructive perspectives, all of them, on how to make things better. Derek passed away, Chuck Ogletree's passed away, but Kimberly and Pat are still around, and I applaud them for their continuing efforts to voice critical perspectives on the law and society. Okay, I've already mentioned the X example, and just I think this will be my last slide. So globally, so academic freedom is a global problem. I've already mentioned it's a problem in the UK, but everywhere. And this map is an attempt to visualize the extent to which there is academic freedom in countries around the world. So the more purple and blue you are, the more academic freedom you have. The more pink and red you are, the less academic freedom that you have. And you can see how those patterns fall across the world. So we're not the worst, And I think within the light purple, there's a lot of dark purple. And I happen to think that Penn is a very dark purple, that we are a community that does respect academic freedom, that upholds academic freedom, that values academic freedom. But we're also a society of people, a community of scholars and students, researchers and scholars who value racial inclusion, gender inclusion, LGBT inclusion, Jewish inclusion and belonging, Palestinian, Muslim inclusion and belonging. And I say that not just to say it, because I believe it to the bottom of my heart. And I'll stop there.
In a moment, they'll call you up to join the
Thank you.
panel. I have the opportunity of introducing another great friend that we spent much too much time together, starting in 2018, and it had continued clear through 2024. He's been a friend, a confidant, a counselor, a person who helps bring stability and help to so many here on campus. Reverend Chaz Howard is the Lattimore Howard, Chaz Lattimore Howard, PhD. He serves as the university chaplain and vice president for social equity and community at the University of Pennsylvania, which is his alma mater. Over his more than quarter century at Penn, he and his team have worked to curate a dynamic spiritual and religious community on and around the campus. In addition to the responsibility as chaplain, Chaz has provided leadership to a range of campus initiatives and taught in Penn's College of Arts and Sciences, as well as the Graduate School of Education. In 2020, he was invited to assume an additional role at Penn as the inaugural vice president for social equity and community. Give a great person more work and keep them busier. And Chaz does represent that. please, Chaz will introduce the rest of the panel and then Anita, question and answer.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you, my friend, my professor, Dr. Allen, for not just tonight, but for a career of leadership and service. And you have made Penn, and I would say the country and world, better. So I remain grateful for you. I have the privilege of introducing some of my favorite human beings at the university to serve on this panel here. And I have a couple questions that I'm going to ask, and then we're going to open it up to everybody. Anyone here or those who are watching on live stream also will have a chance to ask some questions. And we'll have a little bit of back and forth, and then we'll eat up all the dental school's food after that too. So, my friends, as I introduce you, I invite you to come on down. First, I would invite Professor Allen to return to the stage. As you heard before, Professor Allen is the Silverman Professor of Law and Professor of Philosophy here. That is amazing. You're the 5th Black woman to get a doctorate in that is an amazing company. Wonderful. So glad that you were here and you all got a taste of her brilliance as a scholar and as a leader here. And she last served as Penn's Vice Provost for Faculty and Chair of the Provost Arts Advisory Council. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to next invite up the co-director of Asian American Studies program, my friend Fariha Khan. She received her master's degree in Arabic and Islamic Studies from Yale University and her doctorate in folklore and folklife from Penn. She teaches courses in South Asian Studies on South Asians in the U.S., Asian American communities, and American race, all focusing on Philadelphia. Her current research includes South Asian American Muslims, food, race, and ethnicity, as well as Asian American folklore. She's published in the Journal of American Folklore and the Oxford Handbook of American Folklore and Folklife Studies. I have seen her on so many panels and give her so many talks over this last year. And it's because you bring a brilliance and a kindness to every conversation you've been a part of. I'm not just saying that. My daughter took her class last spring. And thank you for giving her a good grade. Thank you for that. I'd like to also next introduce up my friend May Long. May is the director of the Pan Asian American Community House, affectionately known as Patch, here at Penn. Prior to joining Patch in July 23, she served as the Associate Director of Academic Affairs and Advising at the Wharton School here in the undergraduate division for 5 years. May's experience also includes teaching and career advising at Penn and other institutions. Across all of her positions, she remains deeply committed to fostering inclusive environments where students of all backgrounds can thrive academically, culturally, and professionally. Originally from Southern China and a former international student herself, May is currently pursuing a doctorate in higher ed at Penn's GSE, where she's also earned her master's degree. Your leadership and what you have done at Patch, not only because there's always such good food at every event that you host, but the way that you have poured into and loved our students these last several years. Thank you for your leadership there. And, Jane, look at you. Good to see you. I'd like to introduce, it just got comfortable. Come on down, Jane Holahan, the Executive Director of Weingarten Learning Resource Center. She creates initiatives that integrate the services of Weingarten to strengthen programs for students. She serves on a range of university committees to promote Weingarten with campus stakeholders all around the university. Additionally, she incorporates the university life mission and goals within Weingarten, and she facilitates the Weingarten Advisory Board. I have seen you help so many students every single day. The academic success of the university in so many ways is because of the work you and your team do outside the classroom. And so thank you for the way that you love all of our students here. And finally, not last but not least, Professor Josh Teplitsky. Come on down. Joshua is an associate professor and the Joseph Meyerhoff Chair in Modern Jewish History here at Penn and the Ruth Meltzer Director of the Program in Jewish Studies at Penn. He's the author of Prince of the Press, How One Collector Built History's Most Enduring and Remarkable Jewish Library. He's the editor with Warren Klein and Sharon Lieber-Mimintz of a book called Be Fruitful, The Etrog in Jewish Art, Culture, and History. And he's one of the 4 project coordinators of the Digital Humanities Project Footprints, Jewish Books Through Time and Place. I first got to know Josh through the work that we shared on the task force in anti-Semitism. And again, as I use this term for Professor Khan, this combination of brilliance and decency and kindness makes your work so impactful. And there were so many times in that room that was so well led by our dean here, where just your presence helped bring hard conversations from head and heart from head down to heart. And I just remain grateful for you. So, I would like to, I think before we jump into some of the prepared questions, I'd love to hear your response to some of what Professor Allen said. It won't put you on the spot, Jane. It's okay. That's it. But Josh, May, and Fariha, was there anything in what was shared earlier from Professor Allen that struck you, that grabbed you? I saw some of you all taking notes, like brilliant scholars that you are. Anybody just want to jump in with a quick response?
I think one thing that really struck and with me about what Dr. Allen mentioned is about the importance not to dehumanize the protesters, right? So I work at PATCH, right, a community center basically for anyone who is interested in the Asian and Pacific Islander communities, right? This is a very big community, right, including folks who are from East, Southeast, South, Central, and West Asia, the Middle East, and the Pacific Islanders, right? And there are lots of students who are in the PATCH community. Many of them are Muslims, right? So even though like PATCH, because as a university organization, we don't participate in protests, right? We don't actually really encourage our students to do any of the things. They took it upon themselves. But as a center, our responsibility is to support our students and their well-being and to guide them when necessary, right? So one thing that we see from my standpoint, from the center standpoint, is these students, even though they might be they are the protesters, but they're just normal students that we see on a daily basis. They just care, the communities as much as everyone of us does, right? They share values that we all share. They love their friends. They love their Jewish friends. They stand up for each other. So I feel like this is one thing that I really want to share out loud. It's really very important. So I appreciate that Dr. Allen mentioned that.
I can just add too that I really appreciated Dr. Allen's talk in how she also situated her remarks to our university. We read a lot about what's happening at Penn, we experience it, but having sort of a framework of thinking about it historically is also really important. And the nuances of particular examples of, Professor Wax and the long history that is very complicated, despite the fact that it's written about in so many different contexts. So I appreciated that so much.
A couple of, or maybe just one or two very quick responses. The first response is how supremely unqualified I feel to be sitting up here. You've laid out all of these big, important questions, and they're questions that are both deeply specific to our campus and deeply resonant with campuses across the world. Oxford is something of an alma mater of mine as well, so I was really happy to see those pictures up there. And the real challenges that we face, because this is so very much both a local and a global problem. I was also just struck in, as I have been over the past couple of months, as we think about some of these issues, in the ways in which the different spaces and places on campus are so crucial to how some of these dramas play out. And in particular, the ways in which some of the themes of protest play out in the very common non-classroom spaces of our campus. And the great distinction that I personally have had actually the pleasure of experiencing as an instructor about the worlds of civility that to my eyes and to my mind take place within the classroom, and then the spaces in which there is a good deal less civility outside of them. And so I wish I had an answer response, but I wondered if we might think with or or think about ways to harness perhaps even some of the energies that come from the positive world of the classroom, even where students can quite seriously disagree with each other, into those other spaces of the campus at large.
It's a good touch-off spot for I think the first question I'd love for us to wrestle with is this is such a hard, this has been in so many ways one of the driving questions in higher ed this last year. This the sort of the journey with free speech, hate speech, I would add threatening speech to that as well. And to your point, Josh, like how do we hold all of these things in different spaces? And here's the question. So whether that's in a paper that someone is writing, whether that's in a conversation one might be having with their roommates, with friends in a club that they're in, casually on campus, whether that's in a classroom discussion as a lecturer or as a discussant, as a student. I think there's a distinction between a faculty member who is saying something, part of their research, and students who are having a debate. Maybe there's a difference there. And then campus protest as well. What should we be thinking about? How can a university wade into this conversation of holding free speech and championing that, pushing back on mitigating hate speech might be a better word for that, as well as sort of being aware of threatening speech and responding to that. Curious anyone's thoughts on it and those different spaces that are happening there.
I think one of the things that we need to do is stop trying to have these big global conversations about free speech or free expression, because we end up having such vague, overgeneralization, vagueness. People are not joining issue. If we can kind of divide our concerns into smaller pieces, it might be more helpful. And I think that one small piece might be, let's just focus on the classroom and talk about classroom issues. Let's focus on laboratories and focus on lab issues. Instead of trying to free speech at Penn, I think we just run into trouble that way. That's just one small thought. And I must say, I have never at Penn, never had a moment of instability. And I've taught for 26 years at Penn, in the law school and in the college, SAS. And I've never had a student make an uncivil comment to another student. So I really relate to what you said about the classroom seems to be one thing. Then outside the classroom, the gloves come off and people start going at each other. And why is that? Why does it seem appropriate outside the classroom, but completely not appropriate inside the classroom?
If I might just add a word to that, it also makes me wonder if there are ways that we can harness what are already our great strengths. I think over this past year, it's been so easy to lose sight of all of the places in which there are bonds of living together, of working together, of thinking together. And I don't mean this really as a criticism. I mean it as a criticism that is meant to be a compliment. I think there are so many places of strength, but that in some cases we almost like took ourselves into a tizzy worrying about the negative and forgot to harness those positive elements. I wonder if we could exactly take some of the, not just energy, but the activities of the classroom out to the other spaces of the campus. If we could harness the trusting relationships that instructors and students have, or that students have with each other that predate the moments of protest, and bring those educational moments and activities into more public view. I wonder what might happen then in terms of slowing the pace and building dialogue.
So I have something, relevant to what Josh just mentioned. I've realized, I feel like social media or the media in general also plays a very critical role in reinforcing, the harmful speech, right? Hate speech, right? But often forget about, the very positive things, the solidarity that we see every day, among people across different, cultural groups or racial groups, right? For example, one thing that I often see from my students who are from the Pan Arab Student Societies, right? They often tell me about like how they continue to be friends, with their Jewish friends, despite of the tension that has been happening on campus, right? And the other story that I read actually on Penn today or Penn Daily, I forgot, right, was about how our panelists, Josh, sorry for stealing the story, right? I was really heartened by the story, right? So it talked about how Josh, right, as, the director of the Jewish Studies program, right, took walks, with the former director of the Middle East Center, right? As a way, just to showcase solidarity, among colleagues, right, who might seem to have very different values, right, or points, right? Like this may seem like a very small act, but it's a very strong display of unity and solidarity. I just wish that our media focused more about that. But things like this didn't get a lot of attention. So I just wanted to, put it out there about like how sometimes media plays a very critical role in how we see the world, and it's not the entire story.
So the Weingarten Center, we work with students who have disabilities, but we also provide academic support. In many ways, I look at it as a safe space. Students just come because they want help. They know that there's confidentiality and they can be open. And what that does is it allows the person who is the learning specialist or the disability advisor to provide that space for the student just to open up and talk and to say, what can I do to give you that support? Who may I direct you to so that you can get more information? So I think that that's where I have seen the Weingarten Center. We're kind of on the tangent. We're not directly involved with the protests, but just a safe space for students to talk.
So I know we're here to talk about speech and academic freedom. I want to just take a slightly different approach and talk a little bit about the lack of speech or the silence, right? And I know that, people thinking about our campus, not knowing, or walking or not knowing Josh taking these walks, thought that the campus was just on fire, that everyone was screaming at each other constantly. And, some of that was happening. I mean, there's some very hurtful things that happened. But I want to talk from my own experience about the silence, right? And just to be aware that listening to the speech is important, but also the lack of speech, the silence is really, really important, particularly for some of our community members, right? There might be cultural norms that prevent students or staff or faculty from speaking, right? You're not supposed to talk back to your professor, right? Or your boss, right? So there are these cultural norms that may have silenced certain kinds of speech or speech in general, right? The migration experience, right? If you are coming from a refugee family and you're fleeing war, there may be trauma or fear of speaking out against political issues, speaking against the government, right? Or the government's actions. You may have to really fear for your life or your loved one's life, right? So there's that piece why people may be silent. I also want to say marginalization, right? If you're from a community that has been marginalized, you may not feel the power to be able to speak, right? That doesn't mean you don't have thoughts, but reaching out and connecting to those that may not be able to speak or may be sitting in silence is really, really critical as well. And, I agree with my colleagues here about the classroom as the site of really important work, right? Important collaboration. And oftentimes, when a student says something that I'm like, oh, that's really odd, or, I could jump to be thinking that this person is being offensive or hateful, right? I teach a course where, I am the minority person in that classroom, right? In terms of my religious or my ethnic background. But I often ask them just to check in, like, could you clarify that, right? Just asking that question, or not assuming that what they're saying is coming from a place of hate, right? So we're sort of reframing that they may be coming from a place of hurt, lack of information, lack of experience, right? I mean, so I think maybe teaching that as well in dialogue is important. So, I mean, those are two things that I've been thinking a lot about.
So when I was a law student, I had a job as a teaching fellow at Harvard College, and I was teaching a class in moral reasoning. And one of my students said, white girl from Oklahoma, she said that there aren't any intelligent Black people in Oklahoma. And just like that, we were talking about affirmative action policy. There are no intelligent Black people in Oklahoma. And I thought to myself, oh my God, how am I going to handle this? And so I decided to handle it sort of the way you just suggested, which is to say, don't assume this is a hateful person. We're talking about an 18-year-old girl from Oklahoma. And so I asked her, well, why did you come to believe that? How did you come to believe that? And it turned out that she had been a big admirer of a Black woman who'd been the head of the school board in her town. And she just couldn't imagine anybody being smarter than this woman. She was just total fan. And then this woman got mixed up in some sort of scandal or something. And it broke her heart. And she literally, as an 18-year-old, could not imagine a person who was Black, who was better than this person. And so she came to Harvard, you think she'd be really great. She came to Harvard saying, there are no intelligent Black people. I mean, the logical fallacy of that was explained by a deep personal loss that she experienced in her high school. And so I didn't excuse her. And I think that her saying that, it was clear to all the students in the room that she was a little, illogical, but I think they could understand where she was coming from. And that helped all of us to back down and not to get all angry and start yelling at her. Yeah.
I often get compliments on how good my English is. Because if I say that I was born in Pakistan, I mean, how can it be that Pakistanis can learn how to speak English or speak it without an accent, right? I mean, so it's just lack of exposure. I mean, look, not all things said are, because you're not informed. It also could be just because you're just plain racist, right? And you believe these things. But, yeah, I mean, my English is really good.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you both, particularly for sharing very personally there. And to your point, Professor Allen, it's easier to have kind of a philosophical conversation around free speech and hate speech and threatening speech, but they're real human beings who have felt the sting, who have just even here on campus. I mean, there are a range of students who, in their words, have felt silenced and censored. There are a range of students who have felt harassed and believe they're on the receiving end of hate speech and hate chants and signs. There are students here who have experienced racist-themed parties and heard professors and classmates say hateful things. These are real human beings and not just sort of topics. And I think it's important to just name that and lift that up. There are professors who have felt silenced as well too. These are really, really hard issues that we are grappling with as administration, as faculty, as students here, as staff here too. I think the next question I want to ask you stems from another thing I've heard from students, is that a lot of people are scared to have hard conversations now. Some of that comes from exhaustion. It's a hard time to be human right now. And we feel beat down by the news and having hard conversation. We just got through getting through pandemic. It's hard to be human right now. But some people are scared to have these conversations also because I don't want to say the wrong thing and offend you, or because I don't want you to jump down my throat and call me a bigot, or I don't want to respond and you call me a snowflake, that I'm soft or something. So people are opting out of big group me's, big group texts, opting out of conversations in so many ways because it's just easier. And yet we are an educational institution and we want people to be brave. We want people to learn and grow from each other and even disagree. what advice would you give, particularly students who are dialogical partners in their own discerning between, and in their own discerning between free speech, hate speech, and threatening speech? What coaching would you give a undergrad, a graduate student who might be wading into some of these hard conversations about how to be aware of these different lines?
I think we have to first start with ourselves. Can we have difficult conversations with our own colleagues in our offices? So I'm in an office of about 25 people, and some people feel very uncomfortable having these conversations. So we have to be kind of models for that, right? But I also have a mentor. We went through team building activities, and she said something, it's very, it's simple but profound. Assume good intentions. And so there are things that are sometimes said to me, I'm thinking, whoa, did you just really say that to me? I take that step back, I hear her voice, and I assume good intentions. So I say, tell me more. Maybe I misunderstood something. So I try to probe to figure out what the intention is. And a lot of times, because I work with people with disabilities and people identify as being neurodiverse, I take some of that into consideration, that sometimes they really are trying their best, but also sometimes people have really lacked that skill. They haven't had those conversations at their dining room tables. So I'm from the old generation. We sat down at 5:30 and we ate dinner together, right? And that's when we talked about our day. And that was a way for us to learn, to take our time to talk about what we learned in school, about some of the goofy things that happened at school, right? And then for our parents to give us feedback and input, right? So that was a fundamental part of my growing up. I don't know if a lot of our young people are getting that in their homes. And I'm not condemning, because I know how busy we all are, but I think that was something that really helped me in my own development.
Other tips you would give young people?
I would say start by asking questions, be curious, right? There are so many things, that we are not aware of, right? I mean, the world is so diverse. Cultures are so many, right? And there are so many different issues that we don't necessarily know a lot about. So I think I would always, encourage students and myself too, just to be curious and to start by asking those very basic questions, right? Oh, I saw that you are wearing this, headscarf, right? What does that mean? Why is it important to you? I just feel like from like very small conversations like that, I learned a lot about the person, about the culture behind it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think that's very good advice, asking questions, but it's hard to ask questions and it's embarrassing sometimes. I know, even though I'm a professor, I have been embarrassed to ask questions. So I had a student here at Penn Law School who was Jewish and from Montreal. And he would not look me in the eye, he would look down, and he called me in the third person, the professor. The professor's lecture was very interesting today. I wonder when the professor said X, Y, and Z. And I thought, why is the student talking to me this way? And so we had a visiting Jewish scholar from scholar of Jewish of the Torah from Israel visiting us. And so I thought, I'm going to be totally embarrassed. I'm going to go and ask. So I went and I sat down and I asked our visitor, could you help me understand this? I think it might be cultural. And he explained to me that this was a student who was raised in a very traditional yeshiva context, and you defer to the professor, and you don't look them in the eye the way a brash American student, Presbyterian would look you right in the eye. Yeah. Anyway, so then this student and I became like really close, and I ended up going to their wedding in Brooklyn, and we're still in contact. And I saw him in New York last year, and now he has like 5 kids, and I met his wife. But it started by my putting aside my embarrassment and shame at not being able to figure the student out, and being willing to embarrass myself and ask questions. But it is hard to ask questions, to ask the kind of questions that you might be most curious about. Why are you wearing a headscarf? I mean, it's a hard question to ask people sometimes, even though maybe they would be perfectly happy to explain to you why they're wearing a hijab or niqab.
That's so cool. That student promoted you to chief rabbi. That's amazing. That's so cool. I struggle with so much of this because, on the one hand, I think many of us do want to assume good intentions, but also there's a lot of pain out there. There's a lot of hurt out there, and there are a lot of really hard conversations to be had that I don't think are just resolved by attributing good intentions to the other. Jane, I'm even hearing what you're saying, and part of what I miss or what I wrestle with when I'm thinking about what you're talking about is when you have the family conversations. My family also, on Friday nights at Shabbat dinner, we used to scream and shout at each other, but nobody would leave the table. We would just scream and shout at each other. But we already had that structural link of being a family. There was nowhere to go other than our bedrooms or the table. So that was it. And so how do we build out those bonds of trust? Because students who don't at all know each other, who are crossing paths with each other, of course, have no relationships to build on. And so they can't disagree with each other productively. And I know even I myself have at times advised students not to get involved in a conversation. Say, this is just too painful, and you are not gaining anything, and you're not helping anybody by being involved in one of these fights. I wish that wasn't my advice, but I do sometimes wonder if we might also do a job of lowering the stakes for some of the students, of saying there are very terrible things happening in the world, but also to sometimes acknowledge some of our powerlessness even, and to say, although we have work to do, we are not necessarily going to solve this trouble by shouting at each other or by scoring points or by insulting each other or by posting somebody's face online or something like that. And I don't exactly know how we would go about doing that, but I wish there were ways that we could also turn down the temperature to say, we're not that great, so we might not be able to resolve it here. Let's everybody acknowledge that we're not as powerful as we might like to be.
I would just add that in talking with students about how to approach this, it's very difficult. It's fraught with a lot of complexities. But I want to point out too that many of our youth are, use social media as a way to communicate versus verbal dialogue, right? I mean, we were just talking no one calls anymore. There's a particular age group who calls you on the phone. I mean, no one. They text you or DM you or whatever. I mean, so these modes of communication don't exist. And I also want to point out that, which I'm particularly sensitive to in my undergraduate population, is COVID, right? So the students that are in our classrooms have experienced isolation during a really, I mean, we all did, right? But during a really critical moment in their maturity and growth. So they may not actually have the tools. Yes, it's very scary. Yes, it's very difficult and painful. And yes, they may not know how to do it, but they're also kind of, and not to offend anyone, but kind of delayed in their maturity level, because they haven't had the daily classroom, right? And look, here's the other thing. I have a child who graduated from college and went into a remote workforce. He does not know how to walk down the hallway and knock on his supervisor's office to ask a question. These are sort of skills that you are forced into, right? So if you're working on remote work, you got to make an appointment on Zoom to talk to it's these scheduled meetings. And so there's also this sort of lack of knowledge of how to behave, right? In a day-to-day setting. And so, COVID, cancel culture, right? Real fear, and, I will say also political correctness. Should I say hijab? Should I say that veil? Should I say the scarf on your head? I mean, I don't know what to say, right? So that means that I'm just going to shut up and not say anything. So it's just this, combination of these particular factors at this moment.
I just wanted to ask a question, actually, of dean privileges. Yeah, dean privileges. You said a couple of things that were just very personal to me. I am always picked on for my accent here in Philadelphia. That New York thing, everybody picks on that continuously, and I don't speak English so well because of that New York thing. So, but you just brought up social media, and we're in a health school. And the implication of people expressing themselves as a member of Penn Dental Medicine's community in the health school and its effect on a community of individuals that may be very distant to them, how they react, what they say, how do we deal with our obligations as healthcare providers to protect our patients and their rights and their feeling comfortable with access at the same time as we have a bunch of people that are much more adept at social media than speaking. How do we equate? What do we do with this?
I mean, you've got to develop some cultural competency curricula that are some seriously good ones, right? Not the silly ones, but good ones that can introduce your student body to the people that they're going to be treating in your clinic, for example. And it's not easy. This morning, I heard a very interesting story on NPR about the use of AI to help to train employees on how to read a room and how to better communicate. Because of social media and the pandemic, a lot of young people are going into the workplace and have no idea how to talk to people. So, I mean, I'm of two minds about AI approaches, but I think that we have to be creative and bold and innovative in how we serve to make it possible for the students that we teach to be able to learn the things they need to know on the so-called soft skills, the people skills. But I think it's possible to make some improvements over time.
If I could build on the dean's question, one thing that I hear more and more students doing nowadays too is not only do they go to like rate my professor and see how hard the class is and see if the professor's a great teacher, but they're also kind of separately Googling professors, which makes a lot of sense, but around particular topics. And if the professor I'm thinking about studying has spoken out on behalf of a presidential candidate or a political position that I disagree with, I'm definitely not taking that professor. Even if this is a math class, or if they have take a position on a global issue that I really disagree with, I think there might be some validity here, I won't feel safe in that classroom. Therefore, I'm going to vote with my feet and take a different class. At the same time, we do want to allow professors to have a life, to have a social media account, to have opinions. And this transcends the academy. I think this is true with plumbers, and this is true with electricians. This is true with the dentist I'm going to, if I were the doctor I'm going to. And if it doesn't feel good to me, I'm going to pick a different one if I have that flexibility in my life. Your thoughts on this balance between like the allowance for someone who is a service provider, be it on campus or out, and their room for opinion, and people voting with their feet and taking a different class or going a different direction? Do we think that faculty members should cloak their perspectives so that people feel more comfortable taking their classes? Yeah, I mean, at the same time, that'd be tragic too. So I think people want to be human, and yet that doesn't mean faculty shouldn't think about it. So how do we strike this balance here?
This semester was actually the first one that I changed my practice in that regard. I usually try to completely cloak and mask whatever my political sensibilities are. And this year, for the first time, I felt a responsibility not to let my students know what my sensibilities were, but to let them know that I did not have the same ones as them, but it didn't matter. Like never before have I said to a student, oh, I don't quite agree with you, but if you wanted to do this, here's where you would apply for funding or something like that. Or I said to them, that's not exactly where I would vote, but if you wanted to do that, there's a number of institutions on campus that you could get in touch with. And I'm really ambivalent about it. I haven't decided, but I felt it was somehow necessary in the past semester to try to model a behavior of polite disagreement. And I'm very nervous. I really don't know what the outcome was, but it was something worth, I think, trying just once. I don't know how others feel about it. I do know that some of us on this panel are very curious to hear what everybody out there is thinking and wondering about, but I'm sure others have what to say about this topic as well.
Well, and I agree. I mean, I would love to hear feedback or, questions that you all might be having, or even your own particular guidance on this. But, I'm also very careful in different contexts about what I say. And sometimes it's harder than it is, easy, or it's very hard to be polite sometimes, but I really try. But I sometimes rephrase it like, that's really interesting. And sometimes I also then fall into, well, maybe I'm just, jaded because of my age, because I'm old and crabby. So it's very hard. And, I've also heard other faculty that have had students tape recording them, to then go to news media outlets with their particular comments. And so, it's hard. I don't have the answer. I really don't. I mean, and I kind of just take it, by that particular moment.
There's something, this is me being judgy here. I think there's something particularly cruel about, I think, recording faculty members and recording peers. In one sense, I think I get the people feeling like I need to take justice into my own hands, and it doesn't feel like a change will come in any other way. Therefore, I need to use the court of public opinion to shame an individual. And that works sometimes. On the other hand, it can feel very painful. So this happened, someone very close to me, where they were recorded and it was uploaded to a politically charged website, and then the flood of emails come in. And that fundamentally, that changes the way people do their work, or it makes people walk away. It's a really, really hard thing. On the other hand, there is something to be said about shaming racists. That I see where people are coming from on that too. And yet, is that the kind of world we want to live in, where we're sort of, that's how we fight, as opposed to engaging very, very hard? I have a couple questions have come in online, and so we're actually going to open it up to everybody here. So if you get the sort of gather your thoughts, we're going to come around with a microphone too, if anybody would like to ask a question or so. But a couple came online, and I'll build on this question. What are the most vital components of productive dialogue that you would recommend for students who encounter their peers using hurtful rhetoric? This is different than the classroom. From a perceived sense of righteousness or justice about an important or urgent social matter, like, what do you do when you hear someone say something? I'll build on the example too. You talked about, I think you're referring to like the hate preachers who come to campus sometimes, and they're just so cruel and so painful. They hit different campuses around, and there's layers to this. I actually don't think they actually believe what they're saying. I think there's a legal aspect. They kind of want to be shut down, or they want you to punch them, and then they sue, and that is how they make. That's it. And yet the signs and all that stuff is so vile and so mean, and it can be very directed at you right there, you right there. That's a little different than someone I'm in school with for 4 years, or my roommate or my hallmate. That's also very different from we're having a hard conversation in the classroom. What advice do you have to people who encounter it like right there? You weren't prepared for it. This could be in our chapter house, on our team, on our floor, on Locust Walk. What do we do when I perceive what I think is hate?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that came to my mind is self-care, because obviously you are hurt, right? You are confused, right? There's a lot of things that going through your mind, right? Eventually it's hurtful. But the first thing that I would do, like if it happened to me, to my kids, right, to my friends, I would say to them, first thing that you need to do is distinguish yourself from this situation. Whatever that is said to you has nothing to do with you. It has all the thing to do probably with the person who is saying that. But I know it's very hard. And let me also share a very personal story that it literally just happened to us like last week. So we live in a predominantly white neighborhood, right? And don't get me wrong, I love my neighbors. Most of them are very kind, right? Respectful people. We get along very well, have very good relationship. But however, one day me and my 3-year-old were playing on our driveway. And then there's this guy who came over and showed me a video of an Asian woman, like doing all kinds of like sexualized pose in TikTok. And he said to me, is that, oh, like she found her to be very amusing and said he has been following her like for months. And then she turned to me and asked, do you happen to know her? Is she Chinese? And I was like, and then he looked at my daughter, my 3-year-old, and said, when she grows up, she's going to be like working at the MLP mall, selling like expensive watches to rich people. I was like, what's happening here? I was like, you know what I mean? When you are a mom and when you have a guy like having that kind of assumption about your daughter. But by the way, my daughter, she's fearless, like she's a tough cookie. I don't care what she's going to do, right? But whatever, she's going to do something meaningful, right? But what position that he's in to make assumptions about those girls who are making like selling watches in those stores, right? They're just people, who are like making hard livings, like I can recognize, like when that actually literally happened to you, it's very hard. So like I took a step back, like I take my daughter by my side, right? First thing that I told myself is, you know what, it has nothing to do with me. It has all the thing, it has all the like to do with that guy being so ignorant. Like talking about like Asian women, like all the stereotypes about Asian women being hypersexualized, right? Or being submissive, right? And all of that, like that we see all the time in social media, it has an impact on people's behavior. Yeah, I just say it's very hard when that actually happened to you.
Hey, thank you for trusting us with that story. I'm sorry that happened. I'm very sorry that happened to you. It's a powerful and painful example of how hard it can be in the moment, because I think there's a temptation to ignore it and laugh it off because you don't want conflict. Okay, all right, keep it moving. Let me just keep playing with my kid. And that's easiest. And you don't want to have a strained relationship with your neighbor forever. On the other hand, to sort of really push back and like, get out of here, you're racist, you're a bigot, you're ruining my, like, also seems like that pretty intense too. Or to say something hurtful back. And I can make a stereotype too. Here you go. And is there fruit in that? And to make this decision in real time, really quickly, very, very, very hard. Other advice?
I have the feeling that we're all here have had some really bad experiences and we're being silent about them, right? Right? But so I appreciate your story all the more because it's a very brave thing to tell that story. I'm going to contrast something which my family did when we were faced with a neighbor that was making some racially inappropriate remarks. So this neighbor saw my brown son and his little Jewish friend from across the street walking from the school bus together. They were about 12 years old, and he tried to run them off the road, and then he rolled down the window and he pointed his cell phone like a gun, and he said, if you go near my children, I'm going to F you up. Only he used the F word, the real F word. So our children told their fathers, and their fathers called the police. And the neighbor was arrested for disorderly conduct. And then we all went to court. And then Judge Valentine and Ardmore sided with the children and our families, and decided to impose a $500 fine on this man for disorderly conduct. And within 4 months, the man had moved out of the neighborhood. So, I mean, so one way to handle this kind of thing is to handle it the way you did. But I think that my husband and the man across the street, they decided to handle it very differently. They decided that they were going to use the law against this neighbor. And incredibly, because I was actually surprised the police they came, they went to his house, they questioned him, they believed the children, and they charged him with the crime. And then he went to court with his lawyers to try to defend himself, and it didn't work, and he was fined and punished. And he was so distraught by this unwelcome approach that he received from his neighbors that he left the neighborhood, never to be seen again.
One more online question, and then I'd like to open it up to everybody. And so just simply just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone around to you too. We had another question online that from someone who I believe is a coach, a life coach and a professional coach, and talked about this concept of unconditional positive regard, which can help guide how to engage with the person across from you. The question is, how should we be coaching students as they enter into a place like Penn at the beginning of their careers here? There's like so much information we want to download into our students, and we try in new student orientations, but there's just not a ton of time. And I think we gave this a lot of thought this year, actually, with new student orientation too. But how should we be coaching students? If you sort of got to sit down with a student who's about to be starting here at Penn regarding these issues, what sort of quick coaching would you give them?
I'm going to go back to Josh. And he said about being curious. Oh, was that May? To be curious. Thank you. And also when we were talking about the person from Oklahoma, we come from different places, right? And so it's really interesting. And I was taken aback by it. I was at an event earlier in the fall, and there was a parent who was from Oklahoma. And she was talking about being a teacher and how they still believe in corporal punishment in her school. I was so aghast as a former teacher. I couldn't believe it. What I should have said was, you still believe in that? Could you explain to me why? But I was just so taken aback because I'm thinking it's 2024. Where do we hit children, right? I live in a different world. I admit to that. And I feel like I'm so distanced from so many issues. So I think being curious and saying that you're from Oklahoma, tell me about where you are from Oklahoma. I know very little about Oklahoma, right? And I think the more that we can engage, I always start with the soft questions. You know, where are you from? Why did you want to come to Penn, right? Trying to figure out who is this person, right? And then that helps to lead into some more serious conversation. But that's how I do it. And that has worked well for me. But again, even for myself, sometimes I'm taken aback and I just don't know how to react to a situation. And actually share that with a student, that sometimes someone's going to say something to you and you're not going to have a response right away. And that's all right too, rather than just lash out.
I agree. I mean, I think being curious, another thing is not sort of assessing a situation. This goes back to the previous question too, of, how do I respond? Do I respond? And maybe you don't respond. Maybe you just step away. In some situations too, you have to also consider your own physical safety. Unfortunately, that can be, your own emotional and mental safety, right? So maybe it's worth engaging, and sometimes it's just not, right? I think that, and also just empathy and, understanding what someone's intention might be. And it may be curiosity, but they may not have used the best words in asking a question as well. But, people do say offensive things. They say racist things, misogynistic things. But there's something else that we haven't really talked about, which I want to just say is that it's also a little bit about forgiveness too, right? Like people have said really horrible things to me too. I mean, I may not forget, but I also really try to forgive, right? People can change. They can learn and grow. We all do as well. So, I think having that sort of in your back pocket is the power to forgive someone, is also helping to build. It's not easy. I don't want to sound like it's Pollyanna. I don't want to say that I've done it really well, you know, but it does, I want to put it out there.
It's a beautiful concept. I mean, I think that it's one thing that those of us who are part of the educational project here at Penn try to remember all the time, that we're all in process and we're all learning, and particular students are in process. And the person who someone is when they're 17, 18 is different than who they are at 22, or the person who they are their first year of graduate school might be very, very different by the time they're done here. And to allow and to continue to hope for that kind of growth, that's complicated, because I think sometimes we want to feel safe. And if someone is making me feel unsafe here, I either don't want to be around them or I don't want them here. And yet, does that allow for growth? It's really complicated, really tough.
I would like to piggyback to the question or the thoughts about when do we forgive, right? And then depending on the person who does that, how old they are, right? I do feel like we should maybe try to strike a balance. Another example, unfortunately, it also happened recently, for example, right? Like the 3 Asian boys at my school district, literally on their second day to the middle school, on their school bus, they were yelled at by 2 8th graders, right? So it's just so heartbreaking. It's literally on their second day to school because they were not allowed to sit in certain seats. So the parents happened to all to be my friends, right? And they, like what they did, reporting. So they reported to the school on the exact same day. And then fortunately, the school took action very fast, right? And the boy, like the 3 boy, Asian, like 11-year-old who were yelled at, they were actually not afraid at all. Like kudos to them. Like when when they were shouted at, like if you don't, like if you sit here again, you know, I will follow you, I will slap on your face, the type of thing. They were not afraid. It's like, just do it, you know? And then they found them from the school yearbook. They went back to the local elementary school yearbook because they were from the same area, right? They found them, they reported them to the school. And with that, the school were actually very like quick to take action and to confirm who are the other 2 people who did that. So with that, you know, like we had a conversation. We are obviously very furious, right? But then at the same time, we also realize those people who did that, who said something like that, you know, who were just they were just 8th graders. Like these are young girls, right? Who should also like be given the chance to take a lesson and to learn and grow from it. So that I get, right? So I feel like for sure, like forgive people, give them the chance and the space to grow is very important, especially for young people, right? And kids. But however, when another of my colleagues who was actually on this exact campus, who was shouted at to go back to their country, he's a director on our campus, right? And there was another colleague on the same campus. I would say my attitude for that person would be very different. And she also got reported as well. So I would really be a very like strong advocate that if you experience anything like this, right? Like just outrageous, you know, like blatant racism, aggression, I think we should actually report them. And thank you, you know, Dr. Allen, for sharing the story too. It made me think, should I have reported the labor?
Mentorship is one of the things which I would suggest to students, because having a faculty mentor on campus or administrative mentor you can go and talk to is a very valuable thing. And in fact, if I could never teach another class and only mentor students, I wouldn't retire. I love mentoring students.
So I'd love to open it up for questions and comments, but may your comments make me think about one thing that's changed. So I've been at Penn, it's like my almost 30th year here, and you know, I can tell stories with the best of them about old racist Penn at times, and I love this place, but definitely have scars. And I remember talking to Black staff and faculty when someone would put a Confederate flag up, when the frat would do some racist party, when people would say, you only got in because you're a long jumper on the team, affirmative action, whatever. And the response was always, all right, what you gonna do about it? Good, don't ever tolerate that, handle it. We got your back, go handle it. And it was never, I'll go to talk to President Roden about it right now. It was, what you gonna do? And there's kind of an underlying of some unhealthy, toxic masculinity and some of that too. When we go up and knock on the door of the person who has a Confederate flag on the window and have words, and like, it's something terrible, or we roll on that fraternity that has to act like your Black Hood party. There's something unhealthy and terrible about that. On the other hand, it's very different nowadays in some ways, that it's expected that the institution will handle it and will fix everything. And even like a hard conversation. And it's just something to think about. I'm not saying it's worse or it was better back then. I think there was a lot that was much worse about handle it, go do it. But I'm aware, as you were speaking, of how things have changed a little bit. Even with kids, where I was coached growing up, of someone said something rude, it's like, well, next time you stand up to bullies. Now it's like, don't punch that bully, you're gonna get suspended too. Go talk to the, like, it's an interesting moment we're in, that I think is progress, but I think there's shadow sides to everything too. Now, as moderator, I have to make this disclaimer before we open it up. Remember, these are meant to be questions. These are not meant to be speeches. So we'd ask for a succinct question or a succinct comment. Do not filibuster our time here, please. We don't have unlimited time. So if you have a thought, please, we see, we're talking about free speech. I don't want to censor or limit anyone's speech here, but be sensitive to the time, please. So don't go too long. And please just raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone around to you. Any questions, comments? If you feel comfortable, please introduce yourself or kind of where you're plugged in at the university too.
Hello. My name is Dean. I am a student here. I have a question about duty. So as a dental student, we have a duty to provide the best care to our patients. We have lots of duties. All Penn students have a certain duty assigned to them just for being a student. Say I'm walking through Locust and I encounter a public display of hate speech. You all gave really good answers on advice you would give to someone. But as far as duty, can I just ignore it and be fine? Or am I held accountable to say something, to right some of the wrong? I think a lot of students will not know what's expected of them, if that makes sense. So what do you think is the minimum requirement for a student, and all students have, this role to uphold?
It's a powerful question. Is there a duty on students, and if I could extend it to faculty and staff, when we encounter hate, is there an expectation, is there a duty to respond somehow? If I could, I don't mean to build on your question, but I think I could ask it, is there a duty on humans? Does this question transcend Penn to respond to hate?
So I think there is a duty. I feel there's a duty. So when I encounter hate, I feel I should do something about it. And that feeling has made me confront people, even in very dangerous situations. So my family comes from the state of Georgia. And I'm the great-great-granddaughter of enslaved Africans. And so some of my confronting hate was like dangerously confronting white racists in the South in the 1960s when I was a child and a teenager. But on Penn's campus, I've never told this before, probably be arrested. But one day I was walking across campus and I was near the bookstore and I saw one of these, we call them hate preachers, right, with the big sign. And I have to confess that my sense of duty led me to walk over to the sign, and I grabbed the sign and I whipped it. And then I ran into Urban Outfitters. And it was, I felt like, was that me? I mean, what if there's a camera? I mean, I'm a distinguished professor and I was the vice provost at the time. I was like, God, I'm not supposed to act like this. But I think that, but there is a place, my background is Southern Protestant Christian. And I think that some of this sense that I ought to do something about evil in the world comes out of that tradition. And I know that others come from traditions that have a similar a similar exhortation. But that was not the right thing to do in response to the sense of duty. I think that that acting on duty does not always mean that you directly confront one-on-one. It doesn't always mean that you take a risk with your own safety and your life. It doesn't mean that you damage other people's property because they're jerks. So knowing what to do in the name of duty is one of the most difficult questions that I think we face in moral life, right? Do we go to war? Do we not go to war? Do we strike? Do we hit back or do we not hit back? These are the questions we have to ask every day. So I would say to you, please don't lose that sense of duty. If you have it, don't lose it, but be circumspect in how you decide what the duty requires of you at a given time.
Co-teach a course with a brother named Brian Peterson. He's director of Maku Black Cultural Center. And one of the things that we talk about in the class is the importance and, in one sense, ancestral mandate to respond to hate and respond to racism right now. But one of the questions is, how should we respond based on our gifts and our situation in life too? And there are some people who may be called to respond in the moment. And there are others who are called to go home and write about it. And there are others who are called to be excellent and graduate and become a professor and change the way we think about it. And there are others who are called to respond with art and creativity. And there are others who are called to respond with just like living a model life that brings something different, or raising kids, or being a good mentor, or be like just so many different ways to respond. And so the discernment isn't do we have a duty? The discernment is, how should we respond?
Just also add that I think it depends on that particular moment, right? I mean, post COVID-19, when there was an intense spike in anti-Asian violence, right? It was physically dangerous to respond to things, right? If someone is crazy enough to spit on you walking down the street, I don't know that that's the moment to respond to that, right? Because you're actually putting yourself in harm's way, right? Post 9/11, right? I mean, you're not going to confront, perpetrators of hate, right? I've been in TSA with my son, going through checking, and, this is post 9/11, where the TSA officers are clearly Islamophobic. It's really not the time because I need to get on the flight and not get arrested, right? So, I mean, those are those kinds of moments, right? Yes, in a conversation where someone says something racist, it is the moment to have a duty to say it. But one thing I want to add is, I think the most powerful moment of duty is to stand for others that are not like you, right? So yes, I'm Asian, I'm not East Asian, right? But it was really important for me to speak out against anti-Asian violence, right? It wasn't my community, right? Tomorrow it will be, and it was yesterday, right? So I think that duty doesn't just only, and I'm not saying that you thought this, but it's also about the duty for others that are not like you. Because ultimately, hate is hate. Is hate.
Just to add a word, so Dean, that's such an interesting and powerful question. And I'm very struck by some of the ways that Chaz has responded to this, which is, we've been talking a lot about different forms of racism and different forms of opposition, but also to sort of put on the table what we experienced last semester was a kind of zero-sum opposition between two different parties that saw in themselves a duty to do whatever they needed in defense of people in a different part of the world. And the way those protesters and counter-protesters and counter-protesters engaged with each other was in a kind of world of being convinced of an absolute righteousness and an absolute evil of the other party. But what I'm thinking about in terms of the answer of you don't have to, or how to respond, is I think one of the things that I found so frustrating about last year, and I imagine others did as well, is that it might be possible to reject that premise. So being duty bound to do something may not necessarily mean falling into one of the two categories or the terms of the debate as the loudest voices have set them up. Like, part of our duty might also be to shift a paradigm, to reject the premise of whatever the particular terms of the debate are. I had a colleague who remarked to me, why are we letting Group X set our intellectual agenda? And they were talking about Group X on the other side of the world, but it was for me such a powerful moment when they were saying, wait, are we falling into line with the particular ideas, agendas, demands, or extremism of one group or another? And are there ways that we can be duty bound to shift, to be neither pro one or the other, to be neither anti one or the other, and to think about getting at something altogether different? Not a definitive answer, but I just wonder if the realms of duty also might take us in some of those directions as well.
Other questions?
Hi, I'm Gilbert. I'm a second-year student here at the dental school. Just seeing that we have such a diverse panel in front of us right now, I'm just wondering from each of you, like, what's one notable influence on your approach to this topic religiously, like from a religious perspective, spirituality, cultural, or how you were raised as an individual?
That's an interesting question, because oftentimes here, what I have seen among my colleagues, people don't want to talk about their faith traditions. And so I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, so I don't talk about it. But yet, I'm a practicing Catholic. Now, I have problems with the Catholic Church, just want to put that out there. But the theology of Catholicism resonates with me. And I say to myself, if I'm going to go to church, if I'm going to listen to the gospel, how am I taking that in and really practicing it? And by the way, I really falter sometimes, and I admit to that. And I say to myself, what could I have done differently? I'm not afraid to talk about my faith, but I notice that people get a little bit squirmy when you talk about faith. However, when someone opens up to me about their faith, that's something that I really want to engage with. Tell me more. I'm really interested. And so I think that that's what I try to adhere to. It's something I think about a lot every day. And so it does really resonate with me, and it follows me.
Chaplain loves when you talk about faith. That's great.
For me, I think the faith and the cultural is so entwined. So I was born and raised as a Muslim. I married a Jewish man. I went to Catholic school, and I sent my kids to Quaker school. So I take a bit of all of that, right? And my own, experiences of how I would not want to be treated. How I have been treated, and how would not want to repeat that. I also have 3 kids. It's my greatest responsibility in the world is to really put out decent human beings, right? Listen, I complain in my office, and I complain really loudly in my house. I scream and yell, but I try to bring my best self in front of others. I hope that works like 90% of the time.
I was born and raised in China. So like most Chinese people, I didn't grow up religious, but it doesn't mean that I don't have faith, right? Depending on how you define the term faith, right? Like to me, faith is the common values that we all share. And interestingly, I sent both of my kids, to Christian schools, but primarily out of the convenience because they are just so close by, right? So it's so lovely to see them say these very sweet prayers, right? But this is not my point. My point is, after coming to the US, I've realized, the world is so diverse. The cultures are so different, but yet at the same time, so similar to each other. So going back to my initial point about being curious, I think I'm actually really curious. I love learning about different cultures, making friends with people who are from different cultures and backgrounds, right? Religious or not, right? So I also care very much about really building solidarity, with people who might seem different from us, right? Like to say, like to even say more, the Asian populations, in the US, like from the number standpoint, it's not very big, right? But the Asians are very diverse, like East Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asian, those who are from Central and West Asia or part of the Middle East, right? Like, but eventually people look at us all as Asians, right? But we need to come together and really embrace each other and support each other and uplift each other. I feel like one thing that I always say to my student is, together we are stronger. So like this is something that I often, I'm wrestling with.
I'm completely uncomfortable with the question, but this seems like a good faith group, so I'm going to answer it all the same. I'm not really used to talking about my personal life that much, but I think it's such a super interesting question, and I've not really puzzled it out before. So I'm going to just like throw a hypothesis out there, and maybe I'm completely mistaken about myself. But I grew up in an Orthodox observant Jewish family, and that meant that a lot of our practices were distinct and different from our neighbors. So in some ways, like my response to the answer is not necessarily about commonality, but also forms of self-imposed denial or being okay with not partaking in things. Like we didn't trick or treat because we weren't gonna eat all of the not kosher candies that we would get from all of the neighbors. Or we didn't drive a car on Saturday, so we didn't get to do some activities that our neighbors got to do. If a birthday party was out of walking distance, it just wasn't something we participated in. And I wonder if also some of those forms of just acknowledging self-denial, that it's okay, this is something our family doesn't get to do, but there's lots of other stuff we get to do, has also in some ways like set a certain set of expectations for me that not everything is within my grasp. And sometimes that's okay too, to acknowledge that people are just going about their worlds in very different ways. And not in a hierarchical way, but simply, that's not the birthday party I get to go to. I wonder if that in some ways has played a practical role in shaping this as well. So thanks for that question.
So you started by asking who the influences, and I say two people clearly for me, Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. Big influences on my thinking about love and nonviolence and openness and diversity and belonging and inclusion. Like some people on the panel, I live in a multicultural family. My husband is an Italian American, white guy. He's Catholic. I'm Presbyterian, raised by a Baptist and a Methodist. We have two adopted children. One is African and Swiss, and one is African and Russian. So, wow, so being accepting and open to different kinds of people, it seems very natural to me, given the life that I built for myself. I think it also helped me that I spent grade 1, 2, and 3 living in Hawaii, which is a majority Asian culture. And so if you look at my school picture, it's like Asian, but it's not just Asian, it's like Thai, Filipino, Japanese, Hawaiian, Japanese, all these different varieties of people. And so from a very early age, I got the sense that the world was mostly Asian, but very diverse. And so it wasn't hard. I didn't have to train myself to be open to other types of people with different backgrounds, because it seemed natural to me. And so I think one of the solutions to our problems is that we should make sure that our children have exposure to people with different backgrounds at a very early age. Because people are not born haters. Why do you have to be taught that?
No, it's a generous question. I think I'll speak very, very briefly. I think I am leftist radical because of my faith. Growing up Christian, and my interpretation of the life of Jesus of Nazareth and the words there pushed me to be radically inclusive. I'd add to that sort of my family's raising of me, and the scholarship of kind of coming up in the Black radical tradition is sort of what my academic life has been about, and has played the greatest formative role in kind of the way I see the world in some ways. So I perhaps two last questions, and then we'll wait. Bridget, and then right over here on the gun. These will be our last two questions. Speed round. Dr. Bridget.
I'm Bridget Dwyer. I'm the Vice Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion in the School of Arts and Sciences. Thank you all for this wonderful panel. It's been really, really wonderful to listen to. Chaz, I'm going to try not to be that person that you just described, not for you. But I do have a comment and a question. So my comment is actually a shout out to Dean Strunk and her college. As you all were talking, it was reminding me of the book that the Grad School of Ed is reading that is called Try to Love the Questions. And I love that framing. Like I got the book and I was like, I still haven't finished it, but I got the book and I was really curious about the title. Like, what does this mean? And as I was listening to you all talk earlier about the courage that it takes to ask questions, that title made so much sense to me. You know, it is, how do we love the questions? How do we love that situation in which we don't know? And that's another thing she talks about in the book is practicing I don't know, and the comfort that we need to have about saying, I don't know. And so I just wanted to give a shout out and bookmark that book for you all. My question gets into a lot of, I mean, again, so interesting, but I've been finding myself listening to you talking, and I was thinking about, you know, all of the things. I think Fariha in particular, you're talking about all of the conditions in which our students find themselves, and all of us find ourselves, you know, the pandemic and technology and isolation and all of these different things. And I'm thinking about the ways in which there's this different kind of escape that we have, right? We can escape into our phones. We can escape into our, you know, our Reddit rooms where we can get this, you know, the same like-minded advice. We can escape into our news channel that tells us the news that's curated to us. And I'm thinking back to like the days when I'd walk into the residence hall dining room and just sit down, and there was no phone to escape into, right? And so I'm curious about that. And that prompts my question. I'm there, Chaz, I'm finally there. Is you all have different roles in the university. And I'm curious, what do you think our responsibility is as different members of the university to foster those opportunities where students don't get to curate those places where they have people like themselves? So students get to choose a roommate a lot more. Students get to vote with their feet about what professor they take. What responsibility do we have to create those conditions where they don't get to choose, and what possibilities are there for that? Thanks.
I'll just jump in real quick first. I would say a high responsibility to do that. And that responsibility, I think, is spread out. So I know it's something that president, and provost, all the deans think about too, but also like the directors of each college house, the heads of sort of student affairs and clubs and sports teams and things too, which I think is positive. And yet I think there are moments where we're losing that race. And it's something that we really need to continue to re-up and think of new ways to create safe dialogical spaces where students can be brave and ask the questions and not know and learn, because I think that there are forces pushing against that. Quick thoughts?
I would just say, you know, I encourage my students to, you know, if there's a group activity, to partner with someone that they've never seen before, to try to write about a subject that they, you know, don't know anything about. But I think something else that kind of goes to your question, I mean, I agree with Chaz, there's a high responsibility, but you know, the other thing that I say a lot, particularly in my American race course, right? Because we're talking about race, and guess what? It's really uncomfortable, right? And it's okay to be uncomfortable. It really is. You know, undergrads are not used to being uncomfortable. And I kind of want to push them into that discomfort, right? Particularly in a classroom, because it's a place where you should be pushing yourself, right? Intellectually, pushing yourself, you know, emotionally too, to kind of try new things, right? Or speak to that person that you don't know, or to really deeply listen to what may be written about your particular community, right? Or how your community is perceived. So, I mean, it just goes back to the discomfort. I mean, I think discomfort is fabulous. It's okay. And it is often necessary.
Thank you, Professor. Final question?
My name's Natalie. I'm also a dental student here. My question is kind of about, it's like kind of for those of us, like, you know, getting into the professional space, a lot of my classmates and I and my peers. Do you ever feel like being like professional and authentic, do you ever feel like those are mutually exclusive? How do you balance that? Those two things? Because at least for me, sometimes it feels like if I want to maintain professional, I can't exactly say what I'm thinking.
Great final question.
Don't feel like if you're not saying exactly what you think, you're not being authentic. Because authentic people have tact and they have discernment. And so bring those things to bear. But I absolutely felt that way. I mean, my first job out of law school was in a big fancy Wall Street law firm. And, they had 0 Black women on the firm except for me, 0 women partners. So I felt like a total, fake. And I was always trying to figure out how can I fit in. But so I think we probably all felt a little bit of that imposter syndrome. But don't let it bring you down too much. I mean, just understand that you don't have I mean, if you're feeling like to yourself, you're feeling you feel like there's something wrong with you because I can't say what I want to say. That can mean that you might be in the wrong career, right? So I left Wall Street after just 1 year because it didn't suit me. I felt like I wanted my own voice, and I was working for clients whose opinions I didn't agree with, whose values I didn't agree with. I felt much better being an academic and being in an academic world where I could write what I thought very, very openly and freely and teach and mentor students.
Final comments on this one?
I think I would just say that in some ways, like your question answers some of the previous questions for me, which is one of the things I was thinking about with Bridget's point was I too feel like an imposter actually in this setting. I know how to talk about the 17th and 18th centuries from a historical perspective. And like, I'm not at all used to being somebody who talks about contemporary inter and intra-communal affairs. But I think that is the discomfort. It's a different kind of discomfort than the one you were describing, but there's a discomfort there. And I fully agree that sometimes we really are, that it's not inauthentic to withhold some of our ideas and our thoughts, but that when we can contribute to the good, it might be worth inhabiting that space of the imposter, or I guess for lack of a better word, maybe we're duty bound to do it. So just even the questions alone have pushed my comfort level, and I'm appreciative of that.
My friends, will you join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for their brilliance?